Well, happy Thursday night. It is a Thursday night, and that means that it is YSS Let's Talk Live, which means we're coming to you live. So if you're tuning in, be it now or maybe even a little bit later, maybe you want to share this, get some friends on, make sure you comment, ask questions, because we have a repeat offender, I should say. I don't want to call you an offender, but you're a repeat guest, a repeat special guest. Samantha Kemp Carlin, YSS mental health therapist. She's got a lot of titles behind her name, folks. We have an LMHC, which I just learned, licensed mental health counselor. And we're just going to go all big time now. And then we're also an NCC, which I learned is a national certified counselor. Is that right?
Yep.
So that's like a certification that you take on top of everything else to like be big time?
It just kind of means that I meet national standards for credentialing, essentially.
Okay, so we are talking with a true expert here tonight. So again, for the folks tuning in, take advantage of this. Ask those questions, put in some comments. And Samantha, first and foremost, welcome again to YSS Let's Talk Live.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back. It's always a fun Thursday night with you, Rusty.
Oh, warm fuzzies. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And tonight, you know, Samantha, I was telling some folks about this today on a staff meeting about the YSS Let's Talk tonight, because this intrigues me what we're talking about. We have Samantha Kemp Carlin here, who again is a mental health therapist, and she's not wearing a Wonder Woman. Is that Wonder Woman that I see?
Oh yes, my Wonder Woman little tiara here, and my homemade Wonder Woman IHYC t-shirt.
Oh, so that's an IHY t-shirt with Wonder Woman.
That's my IHYC t-shirt with a Wonder Woman logo on it.
I love it. And so she's not wearing that for no reason at all. This is what we're talking about tonight. And so we have Samantha here, the mental health therapist, and we're mixing it with superheroes.
We sure are.
So we're talking about this. And again, I find it so fascinating. Before we get to the superhero part, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the therapy that you specialize in and the ages that you work with, where you work?
Sure. So I work at Iowa Homeless Youth Centers here in Des Moines, and I work with what we call transition age youth, which generally captures youth between the ages of 16 and 25. Most of my clients are over 18, so between 18 and 25 is who I work with. And one of my specialty areas, an area that I've been very interested in and an area that I am pursuing training in, is something called geek therapy, which is...
Wait, you said geek therapy?
Geek therapy. It's not a slur. It's not we're not name calling anybody here. But it's called geek therapy because it covers what are usually typically seen as geeky interests. So things like anime, comic books, tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, or even live action role-playing games, which is sometimes called LARPing. Also things like popular culture, television shows like Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Really?
Books and movies, things like Harry Potter, you know, things that have these fandoms, these followings, right? Kind of, they all fall under video gaming is another one. Board games is one of my big areas of fandom. And so geek therapy kind of takes all these interests, and a geek therapist is going to find what the client's interests are and use those interests to help them develop and learn the skills that they need to be successful. So paired up with other evidence-based practices like cognitive behavior therapy, dialectic behavior therapy, things like that, we're kind of pairing these interests with evidence-based practice to provide therapy to a lot of young people, but people of all ages, really.
Yeah, this is again so fascinating. It really is, and I'm guessing you have to do a lot of research.
I do. There's a lot of stuff that I wanna be knowledgeable in, but I just don't know much about. So.
Okay, well then let's go there. Let's talk superheroes. I mean, if we're talking superheroes, I would say probably the first one that would come to my mind. You take a guess. Who would it be?
Superman is probably the most popular superhero. So I wouldn't
imagine that. Imagine that. And you're right, it would have probably been Superman.
Yeah.
And that would be the first one. So talk to me a little bit, again, diving in here, and for the folks tuning in, about maybe the history here a bit. And we'll kind of break this down. And again, I don't know if you had to do a lot of research on this or where you got your info from.
I'll tell you what, we're going to talk a little bit about a brief history about superheroes. And I have to give credit to my husband, Paul Carlin, who is a lifetime geek and has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things comic book in his brain. You could ask him any question you wanted about anything Marvel, DC, Image Comics, Dark Horse Comics, and he could tell you that. So Paul Carlin, behind every amazing therapist, there's a spouse who knows about superheroes, I guess. So he taught me a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing tonight about the history. And like you said, Superman was the first true superhero that we saw in comic books. Before Superman, superheroes were cowboys, they were crime fighters, they might have even been romance stories. Those were the kind of things we were seeing in comic books. But Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster had been working on Superman for a few years before he first came out in Action Comics in 1938. And Superman initially was a hero for the underclass. So these days we see him fighting bad guys like Lex Luthor, right? We see him fighting those big villains. But in the beginning, he was standing up against social injustices. He was fighting people like evil businessmen, corrupt politicians, even abusive husbands, right? He was really fighting for the little guy, which is why he was so appealing. So many people saw him as a hero of the people, a hero for the underclass. The creator, Jerry Siegel, his father, had died in an attack. He had a heart attack while his store was being attacked. And he created Superman in the shadow of his father's moral fortitude, and also made him impervious to a lot of different things like bullets. So he wanted somebody who represented the character of his father, but who wasn't able to die, who was able to continue to carry that moral fortitude forward in his protection of the little guy who needed that support.
Interesting. And you've got my brain spinning here. Mm-hmm. And I know we might even have some more history because, if we're mentioning superheroes, we have Spider-Man, we have Batman, we have Wonder Woman.
Yep.
So Wonder Woman right here. We have all these different superheroes, but you've mentioned some things like being, you use the word impervious. I love that word, impervious to bullets. That there's villains, that there's these things. And I'm starting to see how you might be able to take some of these things and really, in a therapy way, kind of apply that, correct?
Yeah. So initially, superhero stories were really a way to show that a moral force is standing up against injustice. They became really popular during, the time period we were coming out of the Great Depression, moving into World War II, right? There was a lot of injustices to be upset about. And there's a lot of things that were challenging people. In the same way, there's a lot of things that are challenging us today, right? With things like the election coming up, racial inequality, all sorts of other social issues that are happening, right? So they've become popular again these days because we're again, seeing this period of great inequality and injustice, and these stories can become meaningful for us in the same way they were when they were first created.
Again, just absolutely fascinating, incredible. If you're tuning in right now, I have Samantha Kemp Carlin with me on this YSS Let's Talk Live. And we're talking about superheroes. And if you're just tuning in right now, you're like, okay, wait, mental health therapist, superheroes, how are we talking about this? And I just learned from Samantha, it's something that is called geek therapy. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a strategy where you take these superheroes, or you take, and can I say this, popular, it could be gaming, it could be other types of things in the youth's life that you work with, and you make a connection there. And I also find it interesting, and again, you were just talking about why superheroes are so popular, but isn't it also that we have somebody to root for?
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And, it's interesting that you bring up like the youth, right? That's something that they're interested in.
Yeah.
That makes me think of Batman, right? Like Batman, he was the second superhero we ever saw, created in 1939. Unlike Superman, he didn't have all of these really superhuman powers. He was just a regular old human guy who had enough money to make a lot of gadgets, right? So while Superman was a superhero that we could really look up to, Batman was kind of a wish fulfillment character, right? Like this could be you, Rusty, if you had enough money and if you had enough time to study all sorts of martial arts and you were a good detective, like this could be you. And a couple of years later, they introduced Robin, the young superhero sidekick, so that young readers could also see themselves in these stories, right? That you too, a regular, average, normal, everyday person, could accomplish some of the things that you were reading in these comic books.
Okay, so let's dive into the therapy part of this.
Sure.
So how can superheroes help us heal, or the youth that you're working with heal, or what strategies? I've got so many questions here. I'm just going to throw it to you.
Sure. So there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different places that we could start. But when I think about like why these superhero stories are so popular now and how they can help lead us on this road to healing, is these superhero stories, they really allow us to immerse ourselves in a fantasy world, right? I don't know if you're an MCU, a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, but when you go to the theater and you see those movies and the lights go down and it's dark, it's like you're right there. You're in that world. There's nothing else going on, right? There's no election, no pandemic, no terrible weather, right? Like you're just in this space with this movie and these characters that were, originally comic book characters. And so it gives us a little bit of escapism where we can escape our everyday life through these stories, but it also is engaging us emotionally, right? Like these characters have feelings and they have relationships and they have flaws as much as they have strengths. And so we can continue to be emotionally engaged even while we're trying to maybe escape some of the things that are bringing us down in the real world.
I mean, and these, like you said, even the narratives alone are healing. I mean, and it's, my goodness, what would you, I guess, let me ask you this too. How many people specialize in geek therapy? Is this a popular therapy method?
Sure. So geek therapy has been around in different ways, shapes, and forms for the better part of the last probably 15 years. Okay. There's folks that call it different things, right? Some people might call it superhero therapy. Some people might call it role play therapy, especially if they're using those role playing games as a part of their therapy. So geek therapy is really an umbrella term that can kind of include a lot of different things. And there's folks who are now writing papers. There's multiple books that are coming out about how you can use these types of interventions, superheroes and villains in therapy, and how you can use other aspects of, geek interests, anime, video games, stuff like that in therapy. So it's really become more of a big thing in the last probably a decade and a half, maybe the last 2 decades, where folks who are really interested in it and really dedicating to doing the research and demonstrating the outcomes are providing opportunities for other clinicians to learn how to do these types of interventions as well.
I mean, because this is not something, I'm sure, like we talked about, the research that you have to do, but then also drawing these parallels, I guess you'd say, connections. And out of sheer curiosity, Samantha, put you on the spot here, but could you give kind of like a maybe a fiction example of how maybe a character could help or could help a youth heal maybe that you're dealing with? And I say fiction, so there's no real, just kind of put it out there.
Sure. So one of the things that I've done is I've used superheroes as sort of like a group therapy. We will get together as a group and watch different clips or read different sections from comic books and talk about a story of growth that's happening with that character, or talk about how that character's thinking or feeling, or what values are driving that character, right? And a really easy one to do, I use this a lot when I'm talking about anger management, for example, is Bruce Banner and the Hulk, right? So,
okay.
So think about, I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but Bruce Banner got hit with some gamma radiation, and now every time he gets angry, he turns into the Incredible Hulk, right? And so when we talk about anger management, a lot of what we do is talk about how can we prevent like a big blow up before it happens, right? Like how can we be aware of our triggers and the signs that we're about to get really angry so we can start coping and calming down before we get to the point of no return, right?
Before we turn into Hulk.
Right. And so there's some really good examples, both in the comic books and the movies, of looking at what are some of the techniques that Bruce Banner uses to monitor himself and make sure that he is able to stay stable, right? So in the second Hulk movie that came out with Edward Norton, he uses a little heart rate monitor. And when his heart rate monitor starts getting too high, he knows that's when he's getting into the danger zone. And so we can use that example of like, what's your heart rate monitor, right? Like, what are your signs? What are the symptoms that you should be looking for that you can tell that you're about to Hulk out so that you can use some of these coping strategies before you get to the point of causing destruction to your relationships, to property, to the places around you, like we've seen the Hulk do on page and on screen.
Where were you when I was a child, Samantha?
You know, I may have been in utero or even pre-utero. I don't think we're that far apart, but
okay, let me check my heart rate monitor there because you a bit.
I might not have been quite ready for these interventions yet.
Incredible, absolutely incredible, and these strategies. And if people who are tuning in, again, please, this is awesome information to share out there, inspire others. And to know that this creative method is out there, and that we're using it right here at YSS, with Samantha, Kemp, Carlin being trained in this and working with this strategy. For people that might be tuning in that maybe want a little bit more information, they might have a referral, or again, just have some questions. Where do they go, Samantha?
Well, they can visit YSS.org to kind of learn more about the services that we have here. But even if you want to learn more just about geek therapy and interventions like that, a simple Google search will take you to a lot of different places. There's geektherapy.com, which has some podcasts and articles available. There's Geek Therapeutics, which is a geek therapy training ground for clinicians. And there's, like I said, a wealth of actually published works that you can find at pretty much any bookseller, kind of talking about the use of these interventions in a clinical setting. So there's a lot of great options.
A lot of great resources out there. And you said some, and we've been talking about superheroes. Of course, I'm talking to Wonder Woman right across my screen here. But we also we're hitting on other strategies, I guess I would say, or other tools that can be utilized under this geek therapy. And you had mentioned some like video games. Is that correct? Video games, comics, you know, I'm sure maybe even movies could be, I mean, you could use anything that ultimately connects with the youth, right?
Yeah, I've done therapy interventions, especially in this time of pandemic when we've been doing telehealth. I've done therapy interventions using the game Animal Crossing on my Nintendo Switch. So there's lots of different ways that you can incorporate different types of interests into therapy and create a learning experience and a growth experience for your client.
And if it's a game that you're not familiar with, is that something you block out time to do so that way you can learn how to play that game? And
I do. I had never played Animal Crossing before. Before the pandemic, I had never picked up a Nintendo Switch before. It was something when we got our, it was either our tax return or our stimulus check in the mail. I said, can I put some of this money toward Animal Crossing? And my husband was like, yep, if it's for work, go ahead. So now I know how to get those big purchases and just say that it's for work.
Right? It's for work. Yeah, I could see where this could be dangerous. This could be dangerous.
Yeah. So maybe I need to let Andrew Allen know that we need to get some Nintendo Switches for all of our therapists. So
I like this.
Could be pretty beneficial, I think.
Okay, we're going to work on that after this talk. Before we do that, I want to give a couple of shout outs to some comments that have been made here about this and about what we're talking about. This geek therapy or superhero therapy comes in a lot of different names. Pam says, wow, she loves this regarding anger management. Like, when you were giving that Hulk example. And talking about the different strategies. Again, I made a joke about where were you when I was a kid, but honestly, I mean, I think this could be utilized across the board.
Yeah.
Just with everyday coping skills and even with adults, like what you were talking about. I mean, again, just amazing, as Pam also said. Tess says that she loves the costume. Gaming, great way to connect on hard topics. Always impressed with how you bring so much innovation to the work.
Well, and I have to, my caveat with it, Tess is one of my best friends, so I did not pay her to say that, but I appreciate it.
So, well, I tell you what, so much great information, and a shout out to Matt, who is behind the scenes here, running the screens, running the camera, and also keeping up with everything you say, Samantha, and even those links that you just put out and that you said for resources, they're right there on the chat box. Wow. So anybody that's tuning in right now, I invite you to share this video for those who need this information out there. And if you want to rewatch this video, or give folks maybe a prompting to watch the video, you can just tell them to go to YSS.org and you can watch all of the YSS Let's Talks that we have every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Right here on Facebook Live at We Are YSS. So Samantha, this again, I really did not know that much about this information. I am intrigued, even more so now. Any other things you want to leave folks with?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't just talk a little bit more about some other different ways that superheroes can help us heal, right?
Yes.
So one of the big reasons why superhero stories are so popular is, especially in comic books, is they're very formulaic and predictable stories, right? The hero is faced with a challenge they have to overcome, and then they often learn something about themselves in the process, right? And these stories, not only are they predictable, so we know what to expect in most cases. Some
little curveballs.
Sometimes you get some curveballs, especially the last few decades, there have been more comic book stories geared more toward adults and kind of bigger issues that kids might not quite understand. But for the most part, they have themes that resonate with us, right? Things like right versus wrong, or sacrificing for the greater good, finding meaning in things that don't feel that great at the time they're happening, right? Another big thing is dual identity, or the idea of feeling different, right? So with dual identity, we have, Batman was really Bruce Wayne, right? And Superman was also Clark Kent. And even Wonder Woman was Diana Prince, right? They, or Peter Parker and Spider-Man, right? This idea that we have different faces or different selves that we present in different scenarios is a very human experience. And then we also have the feeling of being different. So I don't know how familiar you are with the X-Men, which were brought to us by Marvel, but the X-Men are characters who are humans that have a mutation that gives them some sort of extraordinary ability, right? So For some, it may be the ability to read minds or the ability to move things with their minds. For others, it may be the ability to from any injury that they receive. For somebody else, it may be the ability to move things that contain a certain element. So an ability to control water or to control things that are magnetic, right? So humans, but that one little bit of thing that makes them different from everybody else makes them targets, right? And who hasn't felt that way at some point or another, right? Who hasn't, as a human being, had something about them that made them feel different from other people or made them feel maybe a little left out from people who weren't quite the same as them, right? So we can see ourselves in these characters and we can connect with these characters. And what we're really seeing is human dilemmas presented in superhuman contexts, right? And so in these stories, we not only do we see ourselves, but we see opportunities that we might not have seen in our own lives, right? So what is therapy but a series of conversations, sometimes hashing and rehashing the same kind of incident out over and over again, right? Like if you're going to therapy because of a trauma or because of a certain anxiety or certain stressors you've been dealing with, sometimes you're rehashing the same story or a similar story over and over again, trying to develop some sort of sense of meaning out of the experience for yourself, or to figure out how can I do this differently, or how can I be better at this, right? And so when we're reading these superhero stories and we're seeing these characters that we connect with having experiences similar to the ones that we have, we might see opportunities or alternatives on the page or on the screen that we hadn't considered for ourselves. And so it can give us an opportunity to see something play out in front of us and for us to think, oh, hey, I wonder what that would look like if I did that too. Or I wonder what it would look like if I took a similar route to achieve my objective, right?
So, to make those connections.
Right.
To kind of fill in those gaps, make those connections, and even, like you said, think about the future.
Right. Right. And to think about the consequences of our actions, right? Yeah. And so it kind of becomes a safe place to try something without us having to experience those direct consequences, right? And we can say, oh, look how this worked out for them. I'm not going to try that. Or maybe I like how it worked out, so I will try that. Yeah.
Yes. Again, it's so much that I just, it all makes sense. Everything you're saying makes sense. And then you say something new and that makes sense about, I mean, and I'm sure, like you say, this has been going on for about the past 15 years where we're really kind of terming it and calling it what we're calling it and kind of refining things now. So again, I want to tell people, if you're tuning in, we're talking about geek therapy, kind of using superheroes in mental therapy or other avenues to really ultimately connect with the clients or the folks that we're serving. And here at YSS, we do this. Samantha Kemp Carlin does this. Let me also ask you, how often do you use geek therapy or superhero therapy or gaming therapy?
Sure. I would say one of the very first things that I always ask any person right in the first session when we're doing that assessment is I ask them what their interests are. I ask them, what are the things that you enjoy doing, the things that you do for fun? I try to get a sense of, is it video games that you like to play? Maybe there's a certain book series or television series or movie universe that you're into. I try to get a sense of their interests and try to find a way to connect with them that way. And even if it's just being able to say, oh, I've heard of that before. A lot of these youth haven't had an adult show interest in the things that they're also interested in. And so that can be the very first time that they hear an adult say, that's interesting, tell me more. Or I know exactly what you're talking about. I like that too. And so that it not only is it really good for building rapport, being able to kind of to say, I understand you, or I understand why you might like this thing that other people might have thought is, a little weird or strange. So that it really is one of the first steps I take to helping build that relationship, is finding out what they're interested in. And if it's something I'm familiar with, great. And if it's something I'm not familiar with, I take the time to learn more about it. So if I have a youth come in and they say, oh, I'm really into, one example was I'm really into the anime, what was it? My Hero Academia. And I'd never heard of My Hero Academia before. And so I said, well, that's really interesting. I'll have to look into it. And I went home and it was on Hulu and I watched a couple episodes. And the next time we talked, and they were using one of the characters as an example of, this is how I felt the way that this character felt in this episode. I was able to say, oh, I know who that character is, that I could totally see him reacting that way.
Wow.
So it also helps them to feel like, oh, you're willing to put in this effort to connect with me too. Yeah. But it's also a way, like with the Hulk example, if you can use an example of something that they know, something that they're intimately familiar with, as a way to help them understand a concept or an idea, it's going to be that much easier for them to start incorporating new skills and strategies into their everyday life. I have a lot of clients come in who their EQ, their emotional quotient, is pretty low because maybe they didn't have grownups to help teach them what emotions they were feeling, or that it's okay to feel certain emotions, or what to do when you're feeling certain emotions, right? And so when we can say, I felt like how this character felt in this scene, we can try to help them put words to that. Well, what word would describe that? Frustrated, upset, angry. And once they can start identifying these feelings in other characters, they can start identifying these feelings in themselves.
Well, and it can also, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but can't it help you as a therapist also help identify their emotions that they're feeling if you're familiar with that character?
Right.
Or kind of that parallelism, if that's even a word that I
right.
just, yeah, kind of, make that connection.
Yeah.
So Samantha, you are truly a Wonder Woman. You really are. She's I'm not talking just about my shirt. I'm not talking about just the shirt you made or the Wonder Woman hat. You really do above and beyond. And I don't think any of us could give you enough kudos for all that you do and truly the difference that you make.
Well, and what I will say about being a geek therapist is there's a level of commitment to it, right? There's if you aren't already immersed in some of these things, you have to be committed to using these tools to help your clients. And fortunately, I'm just I have a touch of ADHD, and that gives me a little bit of the hyper focus I need sometimes to delve into some of these interests that my clients have. And so that's one of my superpowers. ADHD isn't always a bad thing. One of my superpowers is that I have ADHD, right? So that's another way of kind of looking at reframing, right? That we can reframe things that we experience as a positive thing, right? That's one thing that superheroes do for us. But I do want to give you a quick history fact about my favorite superhero, Wonder Woman. Did you know that Wonder Woman was a character who was created by a psychologist?
I did not know that.
So Wonder Woman, who was introduced in 1941, she was not necessarily the third superhero to come out. After Superman and Batman, there had been many, many other male superheroes out. And, William Moulton Marston was a psychologist who previously had written about the untapped potential of comic books. And he had some really strong female role models in his life and said, why aren't there more really strong female role models in the comic books? And so he created Wonder Woman, who was meant to be more powerful than most of the male superheroes out there. but yet still feminine and still having some of those traits that people consider to be feminine. And so she's one of my favorites, not just because she was invented by a psychologist, but because she really stands for truth and justice. And also, like we see with a lot of these other early superhero characters, kind of standing up for the little guy, right? Which is kind of what we at YSS are all about, right? Like, we're about standing up for youth who can't stand up for themselves, and for being there for youth who need more supports than they're able to find in their, immediate vicinity, right? Like, that's kind of what we're all about. So in a way, I think we all here at YSS are superheroes, because we really are kind of fighting for the little guy in the same way a lot of these early superheroes were created to do.
Well, that was the best segue shout out I think anybody could have done. You're good at this, Samantha. And you're right. There are so many superheroes throughout YSS. Mm-hmm. And with you, I mean, you work kind of under our mental health programs and our division. But if you want to find out any more about the superheroes at YSS, be it through the residential addiction recovery programs, be it through a mentoring program, the prevention services, my goodness, I mean, I could go on and on. Like I say, all of the different mental health services that are provided, so many different great programs. AMP, I think I'm wearing an AMP shirt right here, which stands for Achieving Maximum Potential, Foster Youth and Alumni Empowerment Group throughout the entire state, also with YSS here. So any of those programs, go to yss.org and you can find out so much more information about them. So, well, Samantha, anything else? I mean, I have learned so much more to learn. I am not joking you. You have given me a little superhero itch, I guess, now. And I am going to go to Netflix and I am going to watch some Marvel now. Some of the Marvel movies and the shows. Just because, wow, this is true. And now I don't think I'll be able to watch a superhero movie again and think of it the same way, because now I'm going to be analyzing my life and how I share different things with them, my future, what I can, absolutely.
Which that's exactly what superheroes can do for us, right? Like, superhero stories are a great vehicle for understanding post-traumatic growth or stress-induced growth, right? Like, I think of so many superheroes whose origin story starts out with some kind of trauma, right? Like Bruce Wayne, his parents were shot and killed in an alleyway during a mugging.
Superman was orphaned ultimately.
Yeah, he was orphaned.
Yep.
Even Peter Parker. So Peter Parker's origin story involves getting bit by a radioactive spider at age 15, as if that wasn't scary enough, while he's trying to figure out how to use these newfound powers for good, he inadvertently ends up causing the death of his Uncle Ben, right? So many of these characters, even Tony Stark, his original origin story that he was an arms dealer during the Vietnam War and got injured during the Vietnam War over in Vietnam, right? So many of these characters experience trauma as a part of their origin story, and we get to watch them make meaning out of these experiences and take what they've gone through and find ways to not let it hold them down, right? If a radioactive spider bit me, I'd be hiding in a closet probably for the rest of my life, right? I would be scared. I wouldn't know what to do, right? And yet we see Peter Parker, a 15-year-old boy who's balancing high school, bullies, figuring out how to ask a girl out, getting a part-time job on the side to help his Aunt May, right? Plus becoming the friendly neighborhood Superman and helping out all these people in his neighborhood with all their problems, right? So we get to see how they make meaning out of their traumatic and upsetting experiences. We get to see them go through the stages of grief. We get to see them, even experience things like PTSD. If you've watched any of the Iron Man movies, I wrote a huge paper in graduate school for therapy about Tony Stark and post-traumatic stress, and made my husband go see Iron Man 3 in the theaters with me probably 5 times so I could write this paper about this character experiencing signs of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder, and how does he learn to try to cope with that, right? So these stories really do give us real examples of how do these humans with extraordinary abilities or extraordinary minds that can help them to build and create extraordinary things, how do they get through these terrible times, and how can we get through these terrible times also, which is probably why a lot of people are seeking refuge in superhero stories these days. There's a lot of stuff going on in the real world that is stressful. We can find comfort and we can find guidance from some of our favorite characters.
Well, and that brings me to, Samantha, at the very beginning, I had mentioned that you are a repeat guest on YSS Let's Talk. You have so much information, so much knowledge. I actually saw that in the comments right now, somebody commenting on how knowledgeable you truly are. And you really are. And in the previous YSS Let's Talk, you also worked with us on some therapy strategies that everybody can use right now during COVID, with kind of the seclusion, with us, being cooped up. We talked about a lot of different things. So if you want to find those YSS Let's Talks, it's as simple as going to www.yss.org. You can see all of the Let's Talks, and definitely look for the ones with Samantha Kemp Carlin, because those are pretty darn good YSS Let's Talks. So I tell you what, let me also plug next week. Next week is holiday giving. And with holiday giving, we have a all-star panel again, also some repeat folks, which I'm excited to talk to. We have Blake Willitson. He's our IHYC development coordinator. Callie Kennel, who I work pretty closely with here. And also Karen Wickert is going to be on. She's our YSS Foundation Board of Trustees. So a board member on too, all talking about holiday giving. And holiday giving is truly, truly an important thing to talk about. So important that I've had people even Facebook me lately asking, how can we get involved around South Central Iowa with all of this stuff that you talk about, Rusty? And this is the perfect way to get involved, is with our holiday giving. So tune in next Thursday night, 7 p.m., right here at We Are YSS, and share this information. Invite other people to be a part of the holiday giving YSS Facebook Live Let's Talk next Thursday night, 7 p.m. Samantha, I don't want to let you go, though, without any final Wonder Woman words of encouragement to folks out there.
Oh, man. I guess what I would just say is, when it comes to superheroes and learning how to cope, there's a lot of different things we can learn from superheroes. We can be like Batman and his gadget belt. We can develop a toolbox of resources that we can draw on in our time of need. So that's one way that we can learn about coping from superheroes. We can also, like we kind of talked about before, is kind of learn how to cope emotionally by reframing and reinterpreting things that are challenging to us. Or even, I don't want to speak too much on Batman here, but retreating to our bat cave, right? When we need to heal and take a rest, right? Even Peter Parker thought about putting up the Spider-Man mantle for a while when he needed a break, right? So we can learn that sort of coping from our superheroes. And then we can also learn how to be problem solvers, and we can learn how to confront issues head on, find specific tools to handle specific jobs. So like you said, Rusty, I hope what anyone who watches this is taking away is that maybe next time they watch a superhero movie or read a comic book, that they'll look a little bit more closely at some of the things these characters are doing, and see what we can learn from them, and what we can learn from not only what they do, but their relationships with other people.
And we have definitely learned a lot from you tonight. That I can promise and guarantee. Folks, again, tuning in, YSS.org. That's the place to go to find out more information about all of this, and even how to get in touch with Samantha Kemp Carlin, or any of our services at YSS to find out any more information about any and all of our programs. So Thank you so much, Samantha. It is always truly an honor and a joy to have you, especially tonight in the form of Wonder Woman.
Yes.
So, and you look absolutely stunningly beautiful.
I mean, all I'll say is no one's ever seen me and Wonder Woman together in the same room.
Oh.
I mean,
we'll leave it right there. We'll leave it right there. So thank you all for tuning in to a special YSS Let's Talk. Again, every night, Facebook Live, 7 p.m. Thursdays. So thank you again. Thank you, Samantha, Kemp, Carlin. My name's Rusty Johnson, YSS Prevention Specialist. And until next Thursday night, be safe and go watch some superhero movies.
mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.